The thing was standing on the cliff edge in the rain, and it was looking right at me. Not at the sea. Not at the wreckage of the men it had just torn apart. At me. A shape that should not exist, human in the shoulders, human in the way it held its weight, but with a great ragged mass of black feathers hanging wet down its pale back, and a beak where a mouth should have been. The cormorant circled its head like a crown of knives. And I clung to a barrel in the freezing black water and prayed to a god I'd stopped believing in to make it not see me. Let me go back. Let me tell it the way it happened, because the inquiry reports next week, and I know what they'll do. They'll pin it on me. The survivor always takes the blame, tale as old as time. They'll say I panicked, that I lost my nerve, that whatever happened to those 7 people happened because of my cowardice. And maybe some of that is true. But I want my side on the record before they bury it. So listen. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. There are some 300 abandoned islands scattered off the British Isles. We could have gone to any of them. Any single one. But Vance chose St. Ambrose, and Vance was the kind of man you didn't argue with. He had a professor's vanity and a showman's hunger. He'd seen the story, how, on a night in the spring of 1921, the 13 families still living on St. Ambrose had hailed a passing fishing trawler, climbed aboard with whatever they could carry, and left forever. No explanation. No reason ever given. They simply abandoned the only home their bloodlines had known for centuries, and they never came back. When we landed, we were the first human beings to set foot on that island in more than 100 years. Vance saw romance in that. He saw a bestseller. He saw a BBC series with his name in the credits. I saw, well, I didn't see anything yet. That came later. Seen, the crossing. I'd been 6 months at Hartwell, a small college clinging to the edge of a half-prestigious university, when the invitation came. I was a folklorist, and not a particularly distinguished one. I was invited by default, if I'm honest with myself. The only other folklorist in the faculty was old Ashworth, who was crawling toward retirement and had no appetite whatsoever for 2 weeks on a wind-flayed rock in the North Atlantic. So they asked me. The runner-up. The afterthought. The rest of the expedition, 7 academics in all, were archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, naturalists. Proper scientists, in their own estimation. They looked down on me, and I could feel it the moment I boarded the boat. The little glances. The way conversations closed up when I drew near. A folklorist, to them, was barely a step above a teller of ghost stories. I'd give a great deal now to have remained nothing more than that. St. Ambrose lies a full day's journey off the western shoulder of Scotland. You smell it before you see it, guano and brine and something older underneath, something rotten and green. And then the mist parts and the first thing you see are the cliffs. Black as a coal seam and high as tower blocks, rising sheer out of the grey water with no beach, no shelf, no mercy. A wall of rock that seemed to say, very plainly, that we were not welcome. There was only one break in that wall, a narrow bay on the eastern side. That's where we dropped anchor. The crew of the transport ship, 3 weathered men under a gruff Shetland captain, flatly refused to come ashore. They'd stay with the vessel, they said. I remember thinking that strange. I should have thought harder about it. The 7 of us went over the side in 2 motor dinghies, barely able to steer the clumsy things, loaded down with crates and equipment. And as we drew closer to that towering black face, I began to see the nests. Thousands of them. The entire cliff was pocked with holes, an immense honeycomb of darkness, and out of every nook and crevice jutted a beak. Pearl-white gannets and grey storm petrels dropped from their ledges and knifed toward the water like arrows fired from heaven. But most numerous of all, blackest of all, were the cormorants. 10,000 breeding pairs, one of the naturalists said, with a kind of awe, as a flock of the black birds peeled off the cliff and began to follow our little boats toward the shore. I didn't like the way they followed us. I told myself it was nothing. Birds are curious. Birds are stupid. That's what I told myself. I knew the old stories, you see. That was my work. In the island's heyday, the men of St. Ambrose used to climb down those sheer faces without ropes to steal the seabirds' eggs, a delicacy, a livelihood. And the birds, the tales said, grew to hate the men who robbed them. I'd read one account of a boy on his first egg hunt. He reached into a cormorant's nest, and the birds came at him in a black fury and tore his eyes out of his skull with their beaks. Blinded, screaming, he lost his grip on the rock and fell. They found what was left of him at the bottom. I thought it was a cautionary tale. A story to keep children off the cliffs. That's all I thought it was. Scene, the settlement, we hauled ourselves and our gear up the narrow path from the bay. At the top, the land flattened into rough, wind-bitten grass, and there sat the village. 13 squat cottages of dry stone and a single chapel with a rusting tin roof. Everything was furred over with moss, a deep wet green that had crept up the walls and over the thresholds. The island was eating them. Swallowing them whole, slow as a glacier. Give it another 100 years and you'd never know a human soul had ever drawn breath here. We made our camp in the lee of the chapel, where its stone walls broke the worst of the wind. By the time we'd pitched the tents, the light was failing and we were all bone-tired, and we crawled into our canvas to sleep while the north wind came screaming across the island and shook every guy rope like it wanted to tear us off the rock and fling us into the sea. I shared a tent with a man named Calloway, a dour anthropologist with sunken eyes. He'd come on the expedition, I learned later, to dry himself out. He'd been caught drinking at work one time too many. And he couldn't sleep. Twice in that first night I half woke to the sound of him crawling out through the tent flap, and through the gap I saw him pacing in the dark around the chapel walls, back and forth, a thin restless shadow against the deeper dark. So when I woke at dawn and his bedroll was empty, I thought nothing of it. I thought he'd gone walking again. I thought he'd be back for breakfast. He was not back for breakfast. By 10 o'clock there was still no sign of him, and Vance came to me as though I'd misplaced a set of keys. "Where is he?" he demanded. "Gone when I woke," I said. "Perhaps he started work early." Vance tooted, that little click of the tongue I'd come to despise. "His work is here. In the village. This won't do at all." He pulled his coat tight and stalked toward the door. "We shall have to go and find him." Scene, the cliff, the island is only 3 miles across. A handful of us bundled up against the wind and fanned out as a search party, Vance climbing toward the high survey point to look down over the whole place, the rest of us spreading across the slopes. I took the western side. Off the main track, pressed into a patch of soft dirt, I found a boot print. Then another. I followed them, my heart beginning to tick faster, toward the cliffs. The sky was bruising over, black clouds piling on the horizon, and the air had that thick warm stillness that comes just before a storm breaks. The kind of air that feels like a held breath. I followed the prints along the very lip of the cliff, and ahead I saw a place where the rough grass had been torn and flattened, where the earth at the edge was loose and freshly disturbed. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, that prickle on the back of the neck, that certainty you can't explain? Tell me in the comments, because standing there on that cliff I felt it for the first time in my life. The absolute conviction that I was not alone, that something was marking me, and that I should turn around and run. I didn't run. I leaned out over the edge and looked down. Calloway was on a rocky ledge, 20 feet down the face. His arms and legs were splayed at angles that no living body could hold, bent and broken and wrong. His face had been torn to ribbons. But it was his stomach that put me on my knees. It was opened, split wide, so that the white curve of his ribs jutted bare into the wet air, and everything inside him had been pulled out and taken. The seabirds were hopping over what remained of him, jaunty, busy, with something that looked horribly like glee. I vomited across my own boots. I swayed, and for one long sickening moment the cliff edge seemed to tilt toward me, inviting me down, and I think I would have fallen. I think I would have pitched forward onto those rocks beside him, if the shouts of the others hadn't reached me through the wind and dragged me back from the brink. Scene, the argument. We got back to the chapel just as the storm fell on us. And it didn't arrive so much as attack, a hateful, drenching onslaught, rain hammering the tin roof and finding every gap and seam to leak through. We sat soaked and silent on the stone floor while the evening came down black, and Vance paced. "We need to leave," I said at last, "to break the awful quiet as much as anything. Tonight. Fire one of the flares. Signal the ship and get us off this island." "Inconceivable," Vance said, not even pausing his stride. "A sad business, of course. But we all knew what Calloway was. A drunk. He went wandering in the dark and he slipped. No, we'll take the rest of this evening, only decent. But tomorrow we get back to the work." "His body is still out there," I said. "With the birds." He stopped. Bit his lip in irritation, as though grief were an inconvenience I'd manufactured to spoil his schedule. "Fine," he snapped. "You'll take a dinghy out to the ship. Have them radio the mainland, get a winch sent ashore, it's the only way we'll recover him." He turned. "Lindqvist. You'll go with him." Lindqvist was an ornithologist, a tall woman with a great mass of red hair she kept stuffed under a wool cap. She didn't complain. She just nodded and reached for her coat. Seeing the ship, she took the tiller. The storm had eased for the moment, gone sullen and quiet, and left behind it a thick low mist that sat on the water like wet wool. We puttered out of the bay, and Lindqvist lit a cigarette, cupping the flame against the damp. "The seabirds," I said. "They don't attack people. Do they?" She snorted smoke through her nose. "A few of the species will have a go at you in nesting season, if you're fool enough to crowd their eggs. A peck, a dive. But attack? Kill?" She shook her head. "No. Your friend Calloway fell. He was drunk and it was dark and he fell, that's all. The birds we found on him were just," she paused, exhaled. "Opportunists." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. We slid through a wall of mist and the transport ship rose up before us, dark and silent. Too silent. There were no lights in her superstructure. No crewmen on her deck. And above her, wheeling in a slow black spiral against the gray sky, a great mass of cormorants. Circling. Waiting. I looked back at Lindqvist. She'd seen them too. She crushed her cigarette out against the gunwale and steered us in. We climbed the steel ladder bolted to the hull and pulled ourselves over the rail onto the deck. And there, slumped against the door of the superstructure, was the first of them. The captain. That gruff gray-bearded Shetlander. His throat had been opened ear to ear, and his eyes were fixed wide and white on the sky above. I spun away from him and there were the other two. One near the starboard rail with his skull caved in, dark matter pooled beneath. The other face down, his back laid open in long ragged furrows, like something had raked him to the bone. Lindqvist pushed past me into the control room. I heard her working the radio, the click and twist of the dials, and then nothing. Nothing but a dead hiss of static. I looked up at the roof of the cabin. The antennae, the aerials, every means we had of calling for help, they were bent and snapped and torn down. And above them, that slow black wheel of birds turned and turned. "We need to get off this ship," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. Lindqvist didn't argue. Seeing the water, we scrambled back down into the dinghy. She yanked the cord on the outboard, once, twice, it caught, spluttered, snarled into life, and we pulled away from that ship of dead men as fast as the little engine would carry us. The cormorants broke from their spiral and came after us, a low black streak following our wake toward the shore. If this story is keeping you up tonight, do me a kindness and subscribe. We post new horror here every single night, and you won't want to miss what comes next. We were perhaps 100 meters from the beach when I saw it. Off to the side, under the surface, cutting through the gray water faster than anything living should move, a ragged dark shape, a flash of pale flesh and midnight feathers, far larger than any bird. Coming at us like a thrown spear. Lindqvist, was all I managed. It struck the dinghy broadside. The whole boat went over, and we went with it, plunging into water so cold it drove a spike straight through my chest. The hull came down on top of us, a roof of dark, and panic took me, but something deep in the animal part of my brain told me not to fight it. Not to thrash. I spread my arms and legs wide and let myself float, slow, up along the curve of the upturned hull until my face broke the surface in the pocket of air beside it. I gulped a breath and looked back. Lindqvist had dragged herself clear. She was a few yards off, treading water, and our eyes met for one instant. Her face, I will see her face for the rest of my life. Pure terror. She opened her mouth to call to me. And then something took her from below. She didn't sink. She was pulled. Yanked straight down out of sight, gone between one heartbeat and the next, and the gray water closed over the place where she'd been as if she had never existed at all. I am ashamed of what I did. I want that on the record too. I turned my back on the place where she'd vanished and I swam. I swam for the shore like the coward I am, while a woman drowned behind me in the dark. The cold burned my skin and then numbed it, and my arms went to dead weight, and only the thought of what was beneath me, what might be rising toward my kicking legs at that very moment, kept me moving. I dragged myself up onto the black sand of the bay and lay there heaving, and then I forced myself up, because I knew with absolute certainty, that dry land was no safety. Nothing here was safe. Seeing the chapel, I staggered up the path as the dark came down and the rain came with it, harder now, vicious. My throat was so tight and dry I couldn't even shout. I fell through the chapel door and every face turned to me. They were huddled around a little gas stove, heating soup, and they stared at me dripping and white in the doorway. I hauled the door shut behind me. "Well," said Vance, raising an eyebrow at the state of me. His eyes went past my shoulder. "Where's Lindqvist?" It all came out of me at once, the radio, the dead crew, the captain's slit throat, the thing in the water, Lindqvist pulled under, the birds circling overhead. It poured out in a flood I couldn't stop. Vance laughed. A hollow, contemptuous bark. Oh, really? This is too much. I suppose it breathed fire as well, did it? I saw it with my own, it was a mistake bringing you. He stepped close, lowered his voice to something almost gentle, which was worse. You haven't the constitution for this. I warned you it would be hard going, didn't I? Shall I tell you what I think happened? I think you panicked. I think you flipped that boat yourself, the pair of you, and you swam off and left her. Isn't that the truth of it? And then there was a sound on the roof. A skittering. A dragging weight, moving across the tin panels above our heads. The whole room went rigid. Even Vance. Every eye lifted slowly to the ceiling, and we listened to that thing move, and I swear before God it did not sound like a bird. It sounded like footsteps. Deliberate. Patient. Crossing the roof one heavy tread at a time. The world tilted around me. And there was Vance, with that same superior smirk fixed on his face, shaking his head. Spooked by a few birds and a rainstorm, he sneered. He turned, threw open the chapel door, and stepped out into the downpour. He looked back at us, framed in the doorway, imperious to the last. And something took him. Not talons. Hands. I saw the pale hands close on the scruff of his neck, and Vance was hauled straight up off his feet and out of sight into the dark above the door. If he screamed, the wind ate it. He was simply gone, and the empty doorway streamed with rain. Scene, the siege, I threw myself at the door and slammed it shut. Block it. Block it. My shout finally tore loose, and it broke the others out of their horror. We dragged equipment barrels across the floor and stacked them against the door, against the windows, anything, while the rain leaked steadily through the holes in that rotten tin roof and reminded us, drop by cold drop, how flimsy our fortress really was. What in God's name is out there? That was Brandt, a historian, pale at the best of times and now the color of bone. I could only shake my head. There were 4 of us left. I looked at them, Brandt, and Whitmore, a wizened old meteorologist, and Pike, a short, sharp-eyed young archaeologist, and for the first time their faces matched mine. Wild. Half mad, half numb. And strangely, that shared terror steadied me. I shut my eyes. Think. I had to think. I don't know what's out there, I said, and my voice came out level, which surprised me. And by God I don't want to know. But it means to have all of us. The same way it took Vance, and Lindqvist, and Calloway before them. Of that much I'm certain. As if to agree with me, something landed on the roof again with a soft heavy thump, and the dragging footsteps resumed. They looked at me. They wanted a plan. They wanted someone to tell them they might live. So I gave them one. It'll expect us to run for the beach, I said. It's flat. Open. Easy hunting. So we don't go to the beach. We go west, to the cliffs. They're lower on the western side. It's not the drop that kills you, Whitmore said grimly. It's the rocks at the bottom. 10 to 1 you're dashed to pieces. And even if you clear them, even if you hit water, will not last 10 minutes out there in a sea like this, not without a boat. Here. Pike was already moving. He'd seized one of the big equipment drums and appended it, spilling the contents across the floor. "It's no lifeboat. But it'll float. It'll do." "Good," I said. "Good man." I had to keep the hope alive in them, even the hope I didn't feel. We worked fast and quiet, lashing 5 of the empty barrels together with ratchet straps and roping a tarpaulin over the top. A crude, ugly raft. But when we tested it, it held. "Now how do we," Whitmore began, and the scratching on the roof cut him off. I raised a hand for silence. "Scene, the plan." I crept to the scattered gear and found Vance's flare pistol. I broke it open. One fat red signal cartridge sat in the breech. I snapped it shut and thumbed back the hammer. "Get to the side door," I whispered. "Quiet as you can. The 3 of you take the raft. When I give the word, you run like the devils behind you, straight for the western cliff, and you don't stop and you don't look back. Understand?" They nodded. White-faced, and crept to the side door with the raft between them. I slipped off my shoes so my steps would make no sound on the stone, and I padded out into the middle of the chapel, my eyes on the roof, searching for a gap. The largest was over in the corner above the old altar, where the rain came pouring through in a steady silver rope. I positioned myself beneath it. I checked the others were braced at the door. And then, God forgive me, my hands were shaking so badly, I kicked over an iron candle rack beside me. It hit the stone floor with a tremendous clanging crash. I waited. The rain. The wind. My own heartbeat slamming in my ears. And then, movement. On the roof. Coming toward the noise. Coming toward me. I raised the pistol and locked my eyes on that gap above the altar, and I waited, and something pale pushed down through the hole into the red-tinged dark. I fired. The flare screamed up out of the barrel in a streak of fire, and in its sudden brutal red light I saw it, fully, for the first time. A scything black beak. And above the beak, set in pale flesh, 2 human eyes. Looking at me. Knowing me. The flare struck it square and burst, and the chapel filled with hellish crimson light, and there on the roof a silhouette writhed and reared, a thing shaped like a man, but with a vast spread of black wings rising and unfolding behind it like some obscene, fallen angel. "Now!" I screamed. Scene, the run, they crashed through the side door into the rain and I came right behind them, snatching up my shoes, and I made the mistake of one last glance back at that writhing winged shadow in the dying red light before I tore my eyes away and ran. We pelted through the dead village, Pike and I hauling the raft between us, Whitmore and Brant out ahead. And then the houses fell away and there was nothing but open ground, black grass and driving rain, sloping down toward the cliff edge and the only escape left to us. Behind us, over the storm, I heard it. The slow heavy beat of great wings driving against the wind. Closing. A shadow swept over us, blacker than the night, and Pike howled in terror, but the thing passed us by. It wanted the runners out front. Brant was fast, faster than poor old Whitmore, and she'd pulled well ahead, and the dark hid the thing from her until it was directly above her. I saw the beak come down and rip her throat away in a single stroke, and she dropped, folded, boneless, into the wet grass and did not move. Whitmore saw her fall ahead of him. He tried to break left, to swing wide of the place where she lay, but the thing came down on him face on out of the black and took him. He fought it. "I'll give the old man that, God bless him," he fought. I heard him roaring and screaming for the better part of a minute as Pike and I ran on. And then there was only the rain. And no more sound from Whitmore at all. We veered right. I could hear it now beneath the wind, the boom and crash of the sea against the rocks below. Close. So close. And then I risked one look over my shoulder and saw the dark shape peel out of the night and stoop toward us. Down. I threw myself flat into the grass. But Pike got tangled in the raft. He half-tripped, went down to his knees, but his head stayed up. And the thing caught him by the hair. I saw his glasses spin off into the dark as it lifted him, kicking, screaming, up into the black above. I did the only thing left to me. I wrenched a single barrel free of the lashings, abandoned the rest, and I ran for the edge. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, too cold, too spent, they just carried me, slipping and sliding over the streaming grass. Pike's screams followed me. Even over the storm, I heard every one of them. Do not look back. There was the edge. Do not hesitate. What would you have done? I still wonder, to this day, lying awake in the dark, whether there was anything at all, I could have done for Pike. But I didn't stop. I threw myself off the cliff. Scene. The sea, I shoved off the lip with everything I had left, to clear the rocks, and for one weightless moment I hung in the howling void with the black water rushing up to meet me. Then I hit. Even with the barrel clutched to my chest, the impact ran up my spine and slammed every breath out of my lungs, and I went under, and the current seized me and dragged me down into the cold and the dark. I got my hands into the ratchet strap. With the very last of my strength I clawed myself up onto the barrel, wrapped my arms and legs around it, locked my fingers into the webbing, and held on as the sea hauled me in a long wide arc away from the island. And I looked back. There, on the very end of the headland, it stood. Watching the water. Watching for me. Horribly, unmistakably human in its shape, the set of the shoulders, the curve of the spine, but for the great wet mass of ragged black feathers hanging down its pale back, and the heavy jut of flight muscle across a chest no man ever had, and the cruel hooked silhouette of that beak. Above it the cormorants turned and turned, a living crown. I pressed myself flat to the barrel and I prayed it would not see me, and the mist rolled in between us like a mercy, and I slipped down into the dark of unconsciousness. Seen, after, I was at least 2 days at sea. Maybe 3. The tides threw me back and forth, and more than once I saw the dark smudge of land on the horizon and willed myself toward it, kicking with legs I could no longer feel, only for a current to catch me and drag me back out onto the open ocean. On the third dawn I washed up on one of the outer Orkney Isles, more dead than alive, and they took me to the hospital at Kirkwall. I was there a week. Starved. Frozen half to death. But alive. When the weather cleared, a delegation of police and Coast Guard sailed out to St. Ambrose. They found the transport ship riding empty at anchor. They found our camp in the ruined chapel, the toppled barrels, the spent flare. But they found no bodies. None. No captain with his throat cut. No Calloway on his ledge. No carnage of any kind. It was as though the entire expedition had simply walked off the edge of the world and left only me behind to tell of it. When they questioned me, I told them the truth. I was too weak, too feverish, to invent anything else, so I told them exactly what I've told you now. And of course they didn't believe a word. Who would? There have been days since, God knows, when I haven't believed it myself. When I've told myself it was all one great fever dream, a delusion born of cold and grief and exhaustion. And then night falls. And I close my eyes. And I see it again, standing on that black headland in the rain, that thing that was not a bird and was not a man, crowned by its circling cormorants, looking out across the water. Looking for me. And I know. By God, I know exactly why those 13 families climbed onto a passing trawler in the spring of 1921 and left their home forever and never, ever came back. The inquiry reports next week. Let them blame me. Let them call me a coward and a liar. I was a coward, I'll grant them that. But I am not a liar. And if there is any justice in this world, no living soul will ever set foot on St. Ambrose again. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Subscribe for more horror every single night. And if you want more stories that will keep you up, check out What the Wow Stories for the wildest relationship drama you've ever heard. Link below. Sleep well.